Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I've got a list from the sub on some problems you were having some issues with on our word problem worksheet number 1 in Unit 1 in Honors Algebra 2. So I'm going to take a few minutes to go through some of these issues, and hopefully if you had some trouble with them, you'll see this online, or I might direct you to this a little bit as we get a bit further. Now, word problems we've spoken about before usually can be dealt with a lot better if you kind of put some things into words sometimes, or think about what's being asked. So the first one we're going to take a look at is number 6. And it says, Rick has D dollars. The formula for the number of gallons of gasoline that Rick can buy with D dollars is given by G equals D over 3. So in other words, the gallons equals the number of dollars divided by 3. The formula for the number of miles that Rick can drive on G gallons of gas is given by M, the miles, is 21 times the gallon. In other words, Rick can get 21 miles per gallon of gas he has. How many miles can Rick drive on $8 worth of gasoline? So what I'm trying to do here is, I'm trying to figure out what M is. How many miles? It says that right there in the last sentence. So I'm going to plug my value of G, which is D of 3. So I'm literally going to take this, D over 3, and plug it in right here for G. So here's what I get when I plug in D over 3 in for G. So I'd go ahead, I'd multiply that out. I can always make my 21 a fraction if I'd like and multiply across, and I'd get 21D over 3, which reduces to 7D. You're like, okay, but that's not the answer yet. There's one more step, though, once I have that. So now that I know that the mileage is 7 times the amount of dollars that I have, I just plug in my dollar amount, 8, into D and find out that I can get about 56 miles on those that $8 worth of gas. Okay, so sometimes it's just plugging in the information that you have and simplifying it, but you do have to take a peek at it. So I'm not going to say it's just easy as plug and chug sometimes. All right, let's scroll down here to our next problem. All right, number 7. A steak has thickness W inches. Let T be the time it takes to broil the steak. It takes 12 minutes to broil a 1-inch thick steak. For every additional inch, the steak should be broiled 5 more minutes. So letter A, write a formula for T, so the time it would take, in terms of W. In other words, we want to use the W in a T equals equation. That's what the words in terms of means. Whatever's at the end, that's the variable we're actually going to be using in the equation. So what I like to do, and I'll kind of leave it hidden here for a second, is put it into words. So I start with a base 1-inch steak. I'll add any additional inches to that, and that's going to equal my total cook time. So here's how this works. In our case, it said it takes 12 minutes to broil a 1-inch steak. That's the same every time. That's our baseline, so we just put a 12 there. But for each additional inch, now that can change. If I have a 2-inch steak, a 3-inch steak, 5, I don't think we can get that thick, but for 5 minutes for every additional inch will equal our total cooking time. So we're going to use the formula to compute a 2-inch steak, okay? But it's only 1 additional inch. So when I plug it in here, I don't want to plug a 2 in here because that would be 2 additional inches. That would be a 3-inch steak. I'm only being asked about a 2-inch. So I use 1 additional inch, so my W equals 1 that I would plug in here. Plug those in, and I find out it'd take me 17 minutes to properly broil that steak. But note how just putting it into words can make life a little bit easier when you're trying to think about it. Move down a little further here to number 8. Olivia drives her car at 60 miles per hour for T hours. Ian drives his car 50 miles per hour for T plus 2 hours, so he's driving longer than Olivia does. Write a simplified expression for the sum of the distances traveled by the 2 cars. Okay, so we're going to have Olivia's miles plus Ian's miles equals the total. So again, all we do is we go back and we say, okay, when I'm figuring out distance, distance is rate times time. Okay, we might even want to make a mention of that right here. So distance equals rate times time. So I look at this and I say, okay, Olivia went 60 miles per hour for T hours. Ian went 50 miles per hour for T plus 2 hours, and that's going to be our D. So once we simplify it, which means we distribute the 50 through here for Ian to the T plus 2, we get this expression, and that would be our expression for the sum of the distances traveled, because sum is just add. So if I knew how much time was in here, I would just plug that in for t, and I'd know how much distance they went together. Okay? Keep rolling up here. Number 11. Okay. Basically, in number 11, we were told we had the length of a rectangle is 10 units longer than the width. Okay, so if my width is w, and the length is 10 more than the width, I use the same variable. Don't use L here, because we don't want to do a two-variable expression. We just need the same w. We're just going to add 10 to it. Think about it in numbers if you're not sure how to do it. Like if I told you, well, the width is 5, and the length is 10 more, what would you get? Well, you get 15. And you're like, oh, and that's when we can kind of generalize it, if we have to, that way. So they tell us the perimeter, the distance around is 44, what's the width? Now remember, when you have a rectangle, this w and this side here would be another w are the same distance. Okay, here, w plus 10 for this length. I'd have another one of those down here. So that's where this is coming from. My perimeter is my width plus my other width plus my length plus my other length equals the perimeter. And then I just go ahead and combine like terms and solve. I have 4 w's plus 20 is 44, and simplify that, and I find out my width is 6 units. And that one's done. Keep rolling down here. Okay, number 12. Jason started with $D in his piggy bank. 1 week later, he doubled the amount in his piggy bank. Another week later, Jason added $20. At this point, he had 50. What is D? Okay, so week 1, we started with $D. That makes sense. Now, week 2 is where this gets a little more interesting. You're like, well, if he doubled it, why isn't it 2D? Again, let's think about it money-wise. Let's say he put $10 in week 1. If a week later it's doubled, it means he has another 10, because 10 plus 10 is 20. So I have to think about that a little bit. If I made this 2D, now I'd be saying I'm adding double that plus what I had, and that's not what it says. The amount was doubled. So in this case, like 10 plus 10 would be 20. And like I noted here, adding the same amount doubles the amount. If I have $5 now, I add 5 next week, now I have 10. If I have $20 now, I add $20 next week, now I have 40. It's doubled. And then week 3, it just says he added $20 to equal to 50 total. Again, I just add the 3 weeks together, make an equation out of it, and solve it. And I didn't write the answer here, silly man. We find out that D is $15. So $15 plus $15 plus $20 is 50, and that makes sense. But we do need to know how to set it up in an equation form. You can't just mental math these. We're not always going to do problems that you can do mental math. So this is kind of easy, so we can set them up and make sure we get them right as we go. All right, 14. We're getting near the end here. We work at a movie theater box office. A large group buys 52 tickets, including adults and children. They purchase 10 more children's tickets than twice the number of adult tickets. Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute. If the cost of an adult ticket is 8 and a child's ticket is 5, how much did the group spend on tickets? You don't always necessarily need to use all of your information right off the bat. And some of you may have a different way of going about this, but since we're doing mainly things here that are single and not systems of equations, that's the way I'm going to tackle it. So here's the way I looked. I looked at the number of adult tickets I have plus the number of child tickets I have equal the total number of tickets I have. So initially, I looked and I said, okay, I have X adults, okay, or you could use A or however you want to do it. They purchased 10 more children's tickets than twice the number of adult. Twice the number of adult plus 10 more. So my children's tickets is identified by 2x plus 10. And that equals the total number of tickets, 52. So I could go ahead and solve this for x, and I'd find out that x is 14. Now that's not my final answer. That's just telling me what to plug in here and here to figure out how many of each type of ticket I have. Once I do that, I find out I have 14 adult tickets, and then 2 times 14 is 28, plus 10 is 38 children's tickets. Now I can plug back in how much each of them costs. It was $8 for an adult and $5 for a child. Plug those in times the number of tickets, I can find out my total. Okay? And again, you could do it with a system, so if you did, no problem at all. But I just kind of like to go with the theme where you're working with these in general. And then finally, money. I like to talk about money. Okay, interest equals principal, not the guys down in the office, but how much money you started with, times rate as a decimal, we'll talk about that in a second, times time. So in this particular problem, it says in 2 years, so my t value would be 2, because that's the amount of time. Normally we assume it's 1 year, but they told us it's 2. You earn $50 interest, which is my I, in a savings account that has an interest rate of 2.5%. I cannot use the 2.5 in the problem because that would be 250%. Now, if you're ever working at a bank and you want to calculate it that way, let me know. I will come put all my money in with you. But for our purposes, we're going to turn that into its decimal format, which you can do by moving the decimal point 2 places to the left or dividing by 100 to get this value. And we're trying to figure out the p. What did we start with? What's my principal? So this formula that I have here, I'm just going to plug in all the info that I have. I have the I, it's 50, my interest that I earned. I don't know the p, so that stays a variable. I know my rate, I know my time. And I go ahead and I simplify the right side as much as I can, multiplying the 2 and the 0.025, and then divide by the 0.050 and find out that I started with $1,000. I appreciate you giving the substitute some insight on what you're doing. I just apologize it took me this long to get back here to be able to see which ones they were. I picked them up a little bit later in the week, so hopefully this will help you out some, and if it doesn't before the quiz, it'll definitely help you out if we need to go back and look at some things.